I give away free Steam games with every major video I do, and here's who won this week. The games available to receive are listed below. To enter, just leave a comment and have contact information on your profile. And now, on with the video. I'm playing something almost every week, and sometimes I want to talk about it and give you a vertical slice. So stick with me for some lightning reviews. This week, on the chopping block. This week I've been playing The Warehouse. Before I start discussing the game directly, I must have a moment of disclosure. You see, I have friends that have assisted in working on this game, and I received a free copy for the sake of review. Does this mean I'm a professional YouTuber now? Ethical responsibilities aside, this gave me a unique conundrum. This is the first game I've ever received, and I was worried that it may taint my perspective and alter my biases in a couple ways. Would I look at the game in a more positive light because I was gifted it? Or would I end up overcorrecting my perspective for the sake of trying to avoid the aforementioned issue? Well, I can't say if I've remained 100% untainted on my perspective, but what opinions I've compiled so far is as honest as I can be. Personal thoughts aside, I was informed from the outset that this game was pretty much a solo-developed project, as well as this individual's first game. With that in mind, I may also be shifting gears slightly to emphasize more constructive criticism rather than just outright trying to shit on someone's passion project. With that in mind, I have a perfect place to start for improvements to the game overall. Customizable controls. The first time I booted up The Warehouse, it was on my Steam Deck, which I was surprised to see running without much issue, but unfortunately I was hampered by one thing. In my mind, customizable controls are not only an issue of preference, but a matter of accessibility. Being able to change controls and remap them to different buttons or inputs is vital to individuals that may be considered differently abled. I myself ran into an issue on the deck because a long time ago, I was exposed to the pathogen called StarFox64, and ever since then have suffered the condition of necessitating Y inversion in order to play a game comfortably on a controller. Well, that and potentially being exposed to the furry pathogen, but that's another matter. But yeah, as far as I'm able to tell, no means of control customization other than a few sliders for look sensitivity. Diving into actual gameplay itself, it's something of a permutation of the old Slenderman formula. Yeah, not to be unflattering, but it's the formula where you're given a list of items to collect around a hostile area, you don't really have any means of self-defense other than movement, and if the baddies catch you, then it's an instant game over. All thoroughly well-trodden paths at this point, so what ways does it differentiate? Well, it's got a few different varieties of baddies, with each one featuring slightly different mechanical twists that made it somewhat interesting to bear in mind as you were having to navigate the warehouse zones. However, some of those creatures seem to occasionally operate counterintuitively to the hint posters placed around the warehouse. I don't know if this is a subtle subversion of expectation in order to lure the player into a false sense of security, or simply a matter of coding not working, but I will say that it was a wonderful means to get me to swear at the game after experiencing what I perceived as a cheap game over once or twice. One creative choice that I was somewhat bewildered by is the matter of the player's perspective seemingly being viewed through a CCTV lens, in spite of the fact you can clearly hear yourself walking around, as well as having a sprint function with a stamina bar. Do employees have to wear body cams when we're experiencing the aftermath? It does get some explanation in the ending, but otherwise the game's story presence is minimal to almost non-existent. Almost an example of all setting, no plot. The PA announcements every so often were a nice touch, but that element was swiftly broken over my kneecap when I would initiate in-game prompts while it was already in the middle of a pre-scripted announcement, and I would be listening to multiple voices competing over the same loudspeakers.
All current anomalies inside the facility have been frozen for the next 30 seconds.
Another matter, though, was that the messages quickly began to repeat. A little bit of extra emphasis on writing and a wider variety of PA prompts would have gone a long way. Maybe on one or two individual runs it was fine, but this game was purported to be extraordinarily short if you can beat it successfully on a first try, which on my successful run lasted maybe 10 minutes. You're basically ticking off items on your shopping list as you make your way between 5 rooms with the intention of getting out. Unfortunately, beyond the slightly frantic collectathon, the game grows rather stale pretty quickly. At the time of writing, I put in maybe about a dozen attempts, and with each subsequent attempt, my desire to play this game diminishes. You see, one overarching problem with the Slenderman collection formula is that it very quickly becomes tedious. The Warehouse somewhat abates this by having room elements and spawn locations of items randomized from run to run, but that should be a given. Another design question I have, though, is why is there a jump function when there are functionally no areas necessitating platforming? There were 1 or 2 assets that looked like you could platform on them for the sake of a shortcut, but alas, I just end up hopping impotently next to the item. Furthermore, a design choice I think works to the detriment of the game is what I call the emergency timeout button. Basically, this freezes all enemies in place for about 30 seconds. A fine idea in theory, but it neuters a fair degree of tension and mystique about the creatures because one of the elements of fear that can work towards enhancing a game is the sense of mystery over whatever is chasing you. However, when you can press a button and they'll effectively stay in place for a fixed time frame so that you can get a good look at them, I can't help but feel it discredits any design the monsters may have, which is all they have because most of them them are little more than static models that pursue you around the arenas while delivering stock sound effects. Although if you divorce the game from the horror element and view it as more of a mechanical challenge, it does add a moderate degree of strategy and planning around your routing. That aside, a more appropriate means of defense or a means to elude foes might have been something like a pickup akin to a flashbang that would leave them stunned but still dangerous if you get too close to them. But then again, I'm not here to do backseat game design. Back to the budget horror title. Actually, horror may not be entirely appropriate. It does seem to have horror pretensions, but at the end of the day, the only fear I have is the fear of having to do another run when I've established to my satisfaction that I wasn't having much fun. I did beat it, and the ending did have its own hammy charm, but it would have gone a long way with a little bit more emphasis on writing and more naturalistic dialogues or scenarios. Actually, if I hadn't received my free copy for the sake of review, and by association took on a feeling of professional obligation to see it through to the end, I probably wouldn't have bothered to play enough to see the actual ending. One could say that I'm being too harsh because this is an almost solo-developed product. I'd say that argument is more applicable for it being a first project. But let's look at some other solo-developed games. Dust and Elysian Tale, any number of the works from the library of David Szymanski, Cave Story, Undertale, Stardew Valley, and I could go on. That being said, even with it being a first project, one needs to be absolutely ready to receive any number of criticisms once you release a product to sale on the market, and I would wager there are individuals that would be far less charitable and constructive than myself. Pricing-wise, especially for a first project, I'd say $5 is asking a bit much. Maybe $1 or $2 would be more appropriate. For long-term enjoyment, I'd say this game isn't going to hold up very well, even if there were improvements made. To me, it feels like one of those streamer titles where you sit around and watch one of your favorite personalities overreact to it rather than play it yourself. And to the developer, Matt, if I may call you as such, for everything I've said, know that I believe more video games in the world is a net positive, and if there's anything I want you to take away, it's not that I want you to stop, and I don't want you to stop trying. Try and take some of the things I've said as a means to springboard to something better next time. Let's look at Five Nights at Freddy's, the robust cultural sensation, as an example. That game's developer previously made a game called Chipper & Sons Lumber Company, and one of the main criticisms that game received was that the characters looked like scary animatronics. You can probably see where I'm going with this. Take criticisms, make improvements, and keep up with the work. I await to see what you come back with next time. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some vacation days to get back to. Hey, look at that, it's the end of the video. Don't forget to subscribe, and remember that commenting can actually win you a free prize. So until next time, this is Gheeotine saying thanks for watching and keep your head on your shoulders.